Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to be doing a weekly metagame breakdown for the Alchemy best of 3 format. We did best of 1 last week. There was some positive reception. Some folks were interested in seeing the format. I've been playing a bit more of it to get a feel for it, and it's honestly really fun. The economy in Alchemy is still a little sketchy, but I think the gameplay is very interesting. There's a lot of diverse decks, a lot of cool things you can do in the format. And it's been, at the very least, a breath of fresh air compared to Standard, where it's felt a little consolidated in terms of what you can really be doing in the format. This is personal preference. If you don't like Alchemy, that's fair. This video is not going to be for you then. We'll cover the other formats as they come up. But there's not a huge amount of data for best of 3, so we don't have the population of metagame distribution just yet. So we'll keep that in mind if we look next week and see where things are at. Diamond and Mythic rank is 3,400 games being played right now from Untap GG. If you want to use Untap, link is in the video description. I'll paste and timestamp all these decks. One thing to note is some of these decks, the volumes aren't going to be huge in terms of games played, so the win rate's going to be fairly high. Alchemy is a format where you'll see some larger spreads. Some people can go on some pretty crazy win streaks. In best of 1, I was playing Otters. I won 17 straight. I went 27-3 in best of 1 going into Mythic. So through the entire diamond rank. So this is one of the ones where the percentages kind of take it with a grain of salt, but look just more what people are playing, what the ideas they can do. So jumping into it, we have Grixis Heist. So this is a mashup of the chorus decks and the Heist mechanic. So 96%. So you have Triumphant Getaway. So this comes into play, you get to Heist twice. So you get to look at 3 non-land permanents in your opponent's deck, and then take one of them. You can cast it as though it's any color. You do this twice, and then whenever you cast a spell you don't own, you gain and drain 2 life. Powerful effect, lets you kind of take their win conditions and find kind of the perfect card for that. You also have the Chorus package, which is probably the strongest thing you could be doing in this format. In particular, Hymn to Ages. So these all interact with each other: Ribald Shanty, Hymn to Ages, and Miselic Ballad. Whenever you cast one course, all your other courses increase their intensity by 1. So it's very easy with this Hymn to Ages to just draw you 3-4 cards. With Storm Chaser's Talent, you can buy it back. I was drawing like 7-8 cards sometimes in the Otters deck. Ribald Shanty, scalable damage spell, and the Miselic Ballad will let you, it's basically like a mass edict, and you gain life, which is pretty strong. Grave Expectations, Heist your opponent's library or graveyard hate. Storm Chasers, this town, like we have with Standard. You also have Triumphant Getaway that you can bounce to hand. Some counters, Confounding Riddle sets you up, stock up for card advantage, Virtue, and then we have a new card from the latest set, Parizev, Crew of 2. Basically, when it attacks, you conjure Ragavan into play tapped and attacking at the beginning of the next end step if the card's on the battlefield. So you basically dash in Ragavan. Which is kind of a cool threat here. This one's an interesting one here because it is technically your only creature in the deck. So if your opponent does have removal, then it is something where it's going to be targeted. It gets hit by most common removal as well. If you want to go full Grixis control, you can also shift that way there. Just play like more this town, stuff like that. Weave the Nightmare, just flexible removal, counter, or Heist effect. You have Grave Expectation for Graveyard Hate, Into the Flood Mod, cheap interaction, Spell Pierce as cheap counter, Flash Freeze for green and red decks, negates cheap counters, Ominous Lockbox, enters, secretly roll a number between 1 and 20. When an opponent casts a spell with the mana value equal to the chosen number, sacrifice it. If you do, copy the spell. When an opponent casts a spell with mana value equal to the chosen number. This one's an interesting one, because it's like, how consistent are you actually going to hit? It just cycles as well, but not 100% certain of this one in practice. You have Pyroclasm for the aggro decks, and then Confounding Riddle, just flexible counter, and then Perforating Croc as another Edict style effect. We then have Jund, Smuggler's Surprise, kind of big mana ramp. So this one here, you have Beans in this deck, you have Smuggler's Surprise to cheat in your big stuff, you have the Overlords in here. Overlord of the Hauntwoods, Balemark, and 1 Enduring Curiosity. Fountain Port Charmer reduces the cost of cards in your hand. You can offspring it, so it gives all the creatures perpetually one less. So you could smugglers in like Terror of the Peaks, Twin Flame Tyrants, any of the big stuff. Chomping Madazor is another new card, 6 mana. When it enters or attacks, discard a card, then seek a non-land. So basically put a non-land into your hand. When you discard a card this way, deals damage equal to its mana value to any target. So you could just like 5, 6, 7 damage them on ETB. You have the Calamity, Galloping Inferno is another kind of big thing. Coiling Rebirth adds a reanimation effect. Slag Storm as a sweeper. And then Warzone Guard enters tapped. At the beginning of your second end step, if it was tapped, return up to 1 target land from your graveyard to the battlefield. Perpetually gets. So just another kind of mana ramp. Play more beans, play more kind of removal options in the deck. Duress is hand hate, graveyard hate, cheap removal. Maelstrom Pulse also just some more removal. Sweepers, kind of surgical extraction effect. You have the end as removal and take their win conditions. Wingbang Vantasaur, big dino that can basically summon you a fight spell or naturalize into hand. And then on Zrag's Rampage deals with a whole bunch of artifacts. There's some affinity decks that I've seen probably more in best of one, but there is like this synth decks format. You have Orzhov Enchantments. So this deck here, we have a new card, Naktumen Shrines Again. All creatures you own, hand, graveyard, library, wherever, get +1/1 perpetually if they're CMC 2 or less. You seek a 2 mana card or less from your library, put into play, and then creatures you control 2 CMC or less get flying. You have the Doll Maker to blink stuff, so you get copies, works nice with Overlord Baelmerk. You have Moonlight Processionist, which gives your enchantments Convoke, and then whenever you cast an enchantment, or whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield, not cast necessarily, or unlock a room, you get to summon a copy of this to your hand, and then discard at your end step, so just kind of ways to get that value. Multiple copies chained together lets you convoke out stuff. Mischievous Lookout. Once per turn, you may cast a non-creature, non-aura from your graveyard. If you do, it becomes a creature as well. And then just things like we see in standard, like the Pixie deck, Nightmare, Pixie, Scavenger, Nowhere to Run, Momentum Breaker, just as removal options. Authority for the aggressive decks, Deep Cavern Madness, kind of hand hate. Sheltered by Ghosts in here as removal, split up as a sweeper, Leyline for graveyard decks, another Porcelain Portent as removal, and then raise past anything with like heavy removal options, especially with these Moonlight Processionists. You can generate a bunch of them, just raise them all past from the into play. We have Azorius Birds, 89%. So this one here, another deck with Naktumen. We have Kitesail Larcenist. This got a buff, so 3 mana. I think this is 2 mana now, if I'm not mistaken. Could be wrong. I'm pretty sure it's 2 mana. Enters, target opponent reveals each non-line card in their hand. You choose one of them, and then basically whenever they cast it, you gain 3 life and draw a card. Sheltered in here. The big card here is Awestruck Signet. Gets bigger with starting intensity for each other Awestruck. With Mockingbird, you just get basically a 5/4 vigilance pretty early. Very quick clock this deck has. Bunch of evasive creatures. Thopterus makes you an army. Prairie Survivalist can add power to various creatures as well. Authority for the graveyard or the aggressive decks. Spell Pierce. Cheap counter, get losses removal, graveyard hate, sweeper decks, big mana decks, you have Aven Interrupters, split up as a sweeper for kind of these creature mirrors. We then go to Simic Big Ol' Ramp. So you have Fear. This is more of a leapfrog deck. There is the deck that's playing like the Momir kind of card. This one's just Simic stuff. Card here, Leapfrog Guide, whenever another creature controls Leapfrog Guide, and that creature perpetually get 1/1 power, and then you can return a card. So a lot of things like just ETB style effects. Fuel Tank Feaster reduces the cost of creatures in your hand. This is another card that could be good in that Jund deck. So it reduces the cost of the greatest mana value in your hand perpetually by 1, and it's a mana dork, so that's something that a Jund deck could play. Fear of Change, when this creature enters or dies, exile another creature you control. If you do, conjure a duplicate of a random creature card mana value. So just kind of like a Momir kind of card. You have the case in here, but a bunch of like Simic things. You got Outcaster Trailblazer that could draw you cards. Clement, kind of like tempo bounce stuff. Alien, kind of a bounce effect. Wingmane, Big Frog God. To be honest with this one, seems a little like it's winning, but just seems like a bunch of cards that were haphazardly thrown together to some degree. Disdainful Stroke for big mana, Feral Encounter, Graveyard Hate with Keen Eye, some more counters in here, Wear Down, Artifact Enchantment Hate, Wingbang, Vantasaur as more removal. You like Simic things. I don't think this is the most refined, like it's winning in smaller samples, but I think there's ways to clean it up a bit. You have the mono white enchantments deck, so this is kind of the infinite combo. In this deck here, the only 3 creatures you have are Dollmaker, Processionist, and Scavenger. Basically what you're trying to do with this deck here is dedicated Dollmaker the 3 Blinds Mice, then the Blind Mice makes copies of the token copies, and then you just keep making exponentially more mice with the deck. You have Solitary Study, it's an Anthem, and then when you lock the store, conjure a duplicate of this card into your hand. When you do, target creature you control gains first. So it's more just like a overall Anthem effect. Mono white things, Virtue can be an Anthem for your creatures, lets you attack and play defense. Overlord of the Mistmores, more tokens. So kind of like a mono white token shell. You can play Caretaker's Talent for card advantage in these decks as well. Authority for the aggressive decks, Shard Mage for protection, Crystal Barricade, anything that's targeting you. Also nice against like heist stuff because it would target. Exercise, Artifact Enchantment, Big Thing Hate, Graveyard Hate, Haven Interrupter. Nice way to kind of also mess up the heist deck because it taxes your opponent. Because the heist cards are in exile. Split up again, as we mentioned. We have Boros, kind of looting-esque effects. So Monument of Endurance. You're playing an aggressive deck. You have Marauding Mako, Burnout Bash, Bastronaut. So this one here gets max speed, could get double strike. Optimistic Scavenger plays pretty nice. Boros Charm in here is burn. FOMO, Imperious Lootmonger got nerfed. The tokens come into play tap now. Inti, so a bunch of ways to kind of just draw discard. You have Case Crimson Pulse for some card advantage, some Monument, and then Nantucket. I'm going to call it Nantucket. I like saying that. Mana base isn't great on this one here. You can definitely kind of clean it up a little, but core of the deck, kind of aggressively churn through your deck, draw discard, you have incidental enchantments, and then the Monument can kind of ping. I think if you're going to go with this route, you play the full Monument over like a Boros Charm. Seems like they're splitting the middle on this one instead of going kind of all in. So some other like enchantment hate, artifact hate, cheap removal. Against sweepers, you have the Bulwark, Get Lost removal, Graveyard Hate, Valkyrie Call. Just in the grindier matchups, your creatures come back. Virtue, again, just the way kind of the creature mirrors lets you go offense, defense. This is another card you could probably just play main over some of the choices. Some of these decks might not be the most refined. It's still pretty early into the format. This format's not heavily explored. There's not like tournaments or stuff like that. So we have Bant Ramp. So this deck here, we have the new card Ornate Imitations. Basically, I think Momir, whatever X is, you get that many creatures across all the CMC. So 5, you get a 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop, 5-drop at random. Doppelgang lets you copy a bunch of stuff. Beans, Ancient Cornucopia gains you life. Omen Path Journey can help you ramp. Mythweaver Pog scales, helps you put lands into play. You have Day of Judgment in here as sweeper, along with Fumigate. You have the Beans package of Overlord and Mistmores, and then you have Lurker of the Deep, another impending kind of pseudo Overlord. So when it enters or attacks, you seek an online card. Whenever you seek one or more cards during your turn, conjure a duplicate of each of those cards in your hand, and manifest those duplicates. So kind of a card advantage engine, the Ride's End effect with Beans in. Aggressive decks, mid-rangey control decks, you have counters, Rest in Peace for Graveyard Hate, Thieving Aven, and the kind of, a lot of decks will kind of scale up their cheap removal. This in the mid-range battles lets you steal their cards. Seize from Slumber is another cheap removal option that triggers Beans. We then have Abzan, kind of prime, if you would. So you have Freestrider Lookout. Just a bunch of ways to get deserts into play. Sandcloud Harbinger. So this is a alchemy card. So when it enters, you conjure 3 Sunscorched Deserts into the top 10 of each player's library. Whenever a player plays a desert, that player draws a card and you gain 3 life. So your deserts kind of cycle. They ping your opponent. You get more deserts. You gain more life. Kind of ping them to death that way there. You have the Iridescent Vine Slasher that pings your opponent. Cheap removal and Grim Bauble. Deserts do scales with the amount of deserts you have as removal. And then Keza, basically kind of or Obsidian vibes from those who played Obsidian Ghost Council. Whenever it enters, you create a 1/1 spirit token, and then its intensity increases by 1. And then spirits you control get XO, where its intensity at the beginning of your end step, you may exile Tessa. If you do, at the beginning of your next upkeep, return to the battlefield, it gets haste. So instead of the gain and drain, you make spirit tokens. Of course, important. Green Shell helps you draw cards and gets lands. Starfall Invocation as a sweeper. Season of Burrow, flexible card. And then Virtues as kind of just removal early, big mana late. Blink effect, and then just bigger kind of removal options. Ghost Vacuum for graveyard. Heist could be graveyard or just mid-range battles. Paw Patch, Artifact Enchantment Hate. Repulsive Mutation as a counter. Aven Interrupter, like we mentioned. Pulse is removal, split up, agent. Just a bunch of removal options. Deadly Cover Up, Urgent Necropsy, flexible kind of removal option. We then have Jeskai Oculus. So similar to Standard. We have the Helping Hand. We have Return Triumphant because Recommission is rotated in this format. So you have your ways to get Oculus, stuff like that. Prophetic Memory, but you have the Hymn package also in here, Ribald Shanty and Hymn to the Ages. We also have a new card in Erebus Flyby Trawler. 2 mana, 1/1 Flying Trample. Whenever it attacks, you seek a non-shark. Discard a card. Discard that card at the beginning of the next end step. Whenever you discard one or more cards, you put a counter on it. So you're naturally looting in this deck, which this deck wants to do, and then it kind of seeks and fuels your graveyard as well. Anguish Reflection, discard a card if you do seek 2 cards that don't share a card type with it. So kind of another discard, churn through your deck, get card advantage. Oculus, obviously the big hit to get back from the graveyard. Ghost Vacuum for graveyard decks, cheap interaction with Spell Pierce Negate. Exercise, Artifact Enchantment, big mana things, sweepers, Artifact Hate, and then Chandra if your opponent brings a lot of graveyard hate, lets you attack at a different angle. And then lastly, Selesnya. This is kind of Selesnya Creature Pile Convoke. You have Fountain Pour Charmer that we mentioned, reduces cost creatures in your hand. Amara lets you take from a toolbox of Convoke style creatures. Knight Errant Vios is in here. The X tokens one, the big Allosaur is in here. So a lot of ways to kind of go in here. And then we have Sanguine Evangelist. Tyvar is a mana sink to overrun your team. And then Buxton lets you, I believe this got nerfed to 6 mana now. But basically you convoke based on the number of tap creatures you have at your end step. You get to seek a creature card, or sorry, a non-land permanent from your library, put into play for free kind of value. Bloomberg Guard Mentor can get pretty big in this deck, just kind of scaling. Not dedicated rabbit deck, just aggressive creatures that happen to have some rabbits. Graveyard Hate, Heist, anti-heist tech, cheap removal that also blinks your stuff. Enchantment or big flyers, Graveyard Hate, Dewdrop Cure in the grind your matchups, reanimate. That's it for Alchemy. Like I said, this format's still pretty, I would say, not well discovered. So there's a lot of things you could probably be doing in the format. If there's a deck you're doing well with, drop it in the comments, and we'll see how things evolve in the next couple of weeks and how the metrics. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you have a great one, and stay